The Pastor Corey Brooks is standing by with us here, and he is obviously from Chicago, from the New Beginnings Church here. But Pastor, you are friends with Jamal Bryant, who gave the eulogy today at the funeral of Freddie Gray, the young man, the 25-year-old who was taken into police custody, severely injured while in custody, and then died from that spinal cord injury, and is the ostensible reason for the protest here, and then it's led now to whatever action there is. What can you tell us about your conversations with Jamal Bryant today?
Well, he described it as a very warlike situation and a very terrible situation, very disrespectful situation. The family has wanted peace today, and so far they've had peace up until today and Saturday, and he's doing his very best to make sure that he can bring about calm, and he's called for men all over the city of Baltimore who are respectful to come and help out to bring back order and bring back peace.
Pastor Brooks, when you see, you said the Reverend Jackson, he said black children are raised to believe they're police targets. There's this undercurrent. It just seems to get louder and louder, the voices saying that there is an unfair system and we need to do something. But there's a difference between protesters and rioters, and what you're seeing, you've got to be watching some of this, of what's unfolding there. What do you think about it?
Well, I think, it's very disheartening, very disrespectful. For the most part, most people are peaceful. They're doing protests in a peaceful manner. But however, there are a small amount of people who seem to be very disrespectful and very out of hand. And for that, they're causing a lot of issues, a lot of problems for the city of Baltimore, but also for our nation.
What are you going to be doing there when you get there, sir?
Well, I'm going to assist Pastor Brian any way he needs me to, just being there as support, assisting him, trying to bring calm, trying to be a voice of reason, to give young people an opportunity to speak and to hear them, create dialogue. I'm just going to be there to support, not to lead anything. I'm going to follow his leadership. He's doing a great job, and I'm just going to be there for support.
If there were a message you could send right now as a pastor to these young men and women on the street, what would it be?
Well, basically, we want justice, but we want to do it in a peaceful way. And I think the two can go hand in hand, and we have to remember to be respectful of Freddie Gray's family, who asked that there be peaceful protests and no violence to be furthered. And so I think that's the best thing that we can do, is respect the family, respect their wishes, and try to bring justice in a peaceful situation.
All right, Pastor, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks,
and good luck tomorrow.
Thank you. Pray for Baltimore. Thank you.
That's Corey Brooks, the pastor of New Beginnings Church here in Chicago. Michael Steele is now joining us. Michael Steele is the former lieutenant governor of the state of Maryland, also the former head of the Republican National Committee. You can see him on MSNBC. And Michael, as you're taking a look at these pictures from Northwest Baltimore, what are your thoughts?
Well, it's frustration, because this is, again, a situation where instead of, organizing and presenting an argument to the powers that be, whether it's the police, the mayor, about transparency and openness in the process, to demand respectfully and peacefully what information they have be shared with the community, you have elements that have resorted to violence, and it distracts from the underlying and really overarching concern that many in the city have about what happened to Mr. Gray in the hands of the police in the back of that truck. So it's very frustrating to watch, and it's very frustrating to see this unfold yet again in a situation involving another young black male who's been killed at the hands of the police. Having said that, I also understand the frustration that's there in the community, and I think that it really speaks in a broader way that police and communities across this country, particularly in urban settings, really need to find that spot where they can get in the same space and talk about community policing, communication, and things like that, and to deal with what we're learning here in Baltimore, long simmering frustrations that the community has.
Now, what's interesting is, if I can just make this personal for you for a moment, you are the former head of the Republican National Committee. But as an African American, you live not too far from Baltimore. Mm-hmm. You have a son who is, I believe, still a teenager, right?
They're both in their early 20s, yeah.
Early 20s now, okay, most recently a teenager. And today, Jesse Jackson talked about, when he was at the funeral for Freddie Gray, talked about, there's something awkward, I think were his exact words, about men having to talk to their young sons about how to, survive interaction with police. Have you had that conversation with your son?
Oh, my gosh, yes. Oh, yes. Oh, absolutely. When they were, certainly when they got to driving age, I absolutely sat down and said, okay, you need to know what the position is when you are pulled over. And when you are pulled over, and you will be pulled over, this is what you do. You roll down all the windows in the car. You turn on the dome light if it's at night, and you keep your hands in the 10 and 2 position on the steering wheel, and don't make any sudden moves. Yeah, that you have to have that conversation, particularly given some of the tensions that exist out there, and as we've already seen countless times just in the past year, of the reaction to these young males, the videos of when the police orders a black suspect or a black male to give them his driver's license, he reaches in the car to get it, they shoot him. So, what do you do? I mean, if that's the standard, where do you go from there? And that is a genuine frustration that it is not new. It is long festered within the black community, and it's something that, again, on issues of race, we very rarely talk about openly and honestly, and what happens, it builds up, and you have these incidences as we've seen over the past year. But that doesn't excuse it. I mean, I want to be very clear here. The death of a black male does not, this is not the proper response to that. When you look at, looting, right now I'm watching a CVS burn in a neighborhood, and I'm thinking to myself, well, when the elderly and those who need that facility need to get their medicines out tomorrow, they have no place to go. So these things, have to be taken in balance, and there are proper ways to express frustration with police action. This is not it. And more calm, more leadership as requested by Mr. Gray's family and other leaders, I think is appropriate.
I want to ask you what you think the federal involvement should be in cases like this. Loretta Lynch confirmed as Attorney General, taking over for Eric Holder, and no doubt this will be one of her first tests, how she handles these kinds of cases, how involved the federal government gets in bringing charges or civil rights charges, and in really taking a look at what they can do on a nationwide level.
Well, until Loretta Lynch gets a phone call from the mayor of Baltimore, this is a local matter, and the same is true for the governor of Maryland, Larry Hogan. Mayor Rawlings Blake has to handle this, and when she and her police chief and other leaders feel that more is warranted, as a result of the investigations that are taking place. Now, I know there's been a federal investigation, at least intimated, if not actually launched. So you've got 4 investigations that are currently going on. And so I think you kind of wait to see how that plays out, and if along the way more needs to be done. Certainly, I think the Attorney General and the President will likely get a phone call from either or both the governor and the mayor. But they seem, they want to be able to manage this themselves right now. And there is a limit to that, to be honest. There is a limit. Having served in elective office as Lieutenant Governor, I know there comes a point, whether it's a storm that ravages a community or a storm like this, that ravages the community, there is a limit, and you have to seek help. And I know the White House has already indicated that they will be available should that call come.
Let me ask you, again, going sort of personally here, as a former head of the Republican National Committee, but as an African American, you live in 2 different worlds politically in America. And you and I have talked about this over the years that you and I have worked together on the air, and also personally we've talked about this. Share with me your thoughts about how you communicate back to white America what the legitimate part of this is, because there's so much as I think a lot of white people are going to be watching this around the country and saying, oh, there they go again.
Right.
And what is it that you,
ask yourself a very simple question. If if when you got pulled over, instead of being issued a summons, you were shot and killed, your son was shot and killed, if when you were walking through a neighborhood in a community from a 7-Eleven and you were going home and you just happened to have a hoodie on because it's raining outside, and then you're chased down by someone in the community and shot and killed. At a certain point in time, you would begin, I think, to express a frustration and a deep-rooted concern about, whether or not the life of your kid or someone in your community matters. And that's where a lot of this is. I mean, there are systemic historic issues for sure, but they're also more recent and personal. When you have zero tolerance laws that are put in place in urban communities, whereas we saw in the Baltimore City area between 2005 and 2008, the police would arrest indiscriminately young black men, gentlemen sitting on their own property on their front stoop. We're told you can't sit there. At some point, that begins to eat and grate at the community as a whole. So you have to look at it from this is not just made up. These are real-life experiences of young black men in America today. And I don't know how I can express it other than to have you witness, as we witness, the Trayvon Martins and the Michael Browns and others, and what happens to them. That's part of a narrative that we see ongoing. So it's a frustration that's real.
Michael, thank you so much. It's always
you got it, my friend.
All right.
Take care.
Michael Steele, former Lieutenant Governor of the state of Maryland, also the former head of the Republican National Committee.